Good evening, everyone. Welcome for another episode of Adventures of Comprehension. Really excited about tonight's episode. This is one that I have been prepping for and really trying to make sure that I have all the right kind of information because this topic can kind of be a bit overwhelming. And I don't want to overwhelm you. I want to give you just the right amount of information that's going to be useful and actionable without, stressing you out. So as you can see from below, tonight we are going to be talking about complex text. And yes, I know this isn't the most, wonderful of topics, but actually it's one question that as a coach I got asked a lot. And I still get asked a lot. Teachers are confused about what complex texts are or what does that phrase actually mean. So tonight we're really going to dig deep into understanding what a complex text is, how to measure a complex text, how to figure out if a text is complex, and then what to do about that as far as your instruction goes, and how to help your students work through some complex text. So, got a lot of great information for you tonight, and I do have a freebie as well that I will link once the video is over. So make sure to stay tuned for that. So I don't have like a note page or anything for you today. So if you really want to take notes, you may want to grab something, or you can obviously come back and watch the replay later. So that's completely up to you. But I've got a lot of great information to really dive into this kind of gray area that shows up in a lot of our standards. And so that kind of leads me to the first thing that I want to talk about, which is the why. Why are we talking about complex text? Um, whether you are a Common Core state or not, I guarantee you, if you look at your standards, that somewhere in your standards, you're going to see the words complex text. It's all about that college and career readiness, getting our students ready for the real world. And this all kind of stemmed from a lot of research that was done a while back where colleges were reporting that students coming in were not ready and capable to read, analyze, and evaluate and comprehend the level and the type of text that is needed for success in like a college type atmosphere. Um, and so that's where it kind of like then trickled down into the standards that we now see in our schools today. So, as an elementary school teacher, you know, I always found myself going, well, why? First off, why do I need to have my student do this? They're in second grade. And then, two, there was so much ambiguity when it came to the word and the phrase complex text that it was confusing. And so it took a lot of research to figure out, what this actually meant and how does it apply to me as an elementary school teacher or even a middle school teacher or even a high school teacher. So that's kind of what we're going to dive into today. So there is need for this at any grade. There's a lot of merit to using complex text, um, and the research proves that. So it doesn't matter really what grade you teach. There really is a need for it. We need to get our students thinking critically. We need to get them to become active readers and present them with a text that they're actually going to have to think through and have to be able to access, content knowledge or their prior knowledge or schema, and to be able to think critically and evaluate and understand and be confused. And we need to let them be confused, and we need to let them, have to converse and talk with others to be able to understand, what the author is telling me in this piece of text. All of that is perfectly okay. I love a classroom where teachers give their students that productive struggle. And that's why I call it a productive struggle, because it's okay to let them struggle if that struggle is, you know, for that productivity and what they're going to get out of it. Um, anyways, so let's kind of dive in. Let's talk first about just kind of like what a complex text is, And then we're going to talk about the formula around a complex text and how you can use that formula to kind of evaluate some text on your own and how you can start analyzing a text through the lens of what a complex text is. And like I said, at the end, we'll talk about kind of how to help your students through these complex texts, okay? So the hard thing about this is that there is no concrete definition of complex text. If you Googled it, you're not going to find one. It varies on multiple points. The first point is the reader. Complex text is going to vary reader by reader, and you probably can see that in your classroom. You present a text, one text to all of your students, it may be complex to some and not to others. And that obviously depends on your reader's ability to read fluently, to decode, their content knowledge, their schema, their vocabulary. Um, I could keep going, right? It depends on the reader. So it varies from reader to reader. It also varies on the teacher's understanding of what complex text is. So, one teacher may present a class of second graders with what they believe is a complex text. And then right down the hall, you've got another teacher with the same average, whatever group of second graders, and they may present a completely different text and what they believe is complex. So it not only depends on the reader, but it depends on the teacher and their understanding of what complex texts are. So the more we can learn and understand this term, and the more we practice analyzing text with this lens that we're going to talk about, then the better able we're going to be all on the same page. And that's really what we need to be. We need to be on the same page for our students. That way they're all getting that same exposure to these types of texts as well. So you can kind of see that if we kind of pinpoint back and forth between those two things, that building an actual definition of complex text is kind of difficult, okay? Um, so it is very important as we talk about this tonight to know that complex text is not like the end all be all. It's really important that you give all of your students a very wide variety of texts throughout your week and throughout your curriculum. Every week, every text, everything you do in reading should not all be about complex texts. You want to vary the length. You want to vary the different text structures. You want to vary the vocabulary. You want to give them something that is easy for them to read just as much as you want to give them something that's difficult for them to read. You want to think about yourself as a reader. If you were reading complex text as an adult all the time, you would be burnt out. Find yourself reading a wide variety of things. You may read some things that you enjoy reading at night, before you go to bed, but during the day, maybe you find yourself reading articles or news articles online or magazine articles, or you may be listening to certain podcasts that are kind of designed around a certain content area, which those can be considered complex text as well. So you yourself as an adult are surrounded by a variety of level of text. That's what we need to do for our students. So I would never say that this is something that you should be doing all day, every day in your reading group, but I will say that it's very important that as you're going through and learning how to analyze text, that then you use that knowledge to make sure you're varying your text as well, okay? So we can, as readers, as an active reader, an adult, we adults can easily recognize what a complex text is. As you're reading a text, you are using your metacognition. So you're using your awareness, right? You're thinking about your thinking. You're using your metacognition to understand that text. And you know when you need to slow your reading down because the vocabulary has increased, because your content knowledge is not as strong, and you really need to make sure you're visualizing what's going on and you're taking time to decode those bigger words that you don't know, or you're using context clues to figure out the meanings of words you don't know, or you have to stop and even look up in a dictionary words you don't know. But as adults, we very easily can say this text is complex for me. We are using our thinking to be able to come to that conclusion. And that's what we need to teach our students to be able to do. Students need to be able to recognize when a text is complex for them. And we do this by teaching reading strategies. So if you're teaching reading strategies such as making connections, visualizing metacognition, and asking questions, then you can use those to help teach your students about when to identify when a text is complex to them. Okay. But as adults, we do this naturally. And so we need to be teaching that to our students as well. So there are lots of different types of text out there, obviously. When we're presenting text to our students, typically we're giving them some sort of fiction or nonfiction type of story or article. A lot of times, complex text, though, will present itself in texts that aren't typical. So things that like are biographies or autobiographies, newspaper or magazine articles. You've got journals or plays or poetry. Historical documents are good. Speeches or essays that are written. Lab reports, tech manuals, different types of text are somewhere where you can really look for some go-to different types of complex text. Now that doesn't mean that if it's not one of those that it's not complex, but those are some unique ways to try to get in some different types of text to expose your students to more than just that normal, here's a passage I found online or here's a passage from our curriculum. You can look for some different types of text, and then that will help kind of widen the variety of what complex text can look like. So students need to be able to examine, they need to be able to analyze, they need to be able to evaluate, they need to be able to probe and ask questions. And that's when they're going to know that that text is complex, when they're able to do those things. If a student can easily read through that text that you've presented to them, they can go through, they know the vocabulary words, they can answer questions, and they're not confused, then they should know that the text was not complex. You should know that the text was not complex. And also, before I go into the next part, when I say the word text, that also is audio and video. Audio and video are considered text as well. So when you're thinking about visuals like graphics or text features, when you're listening to podcasts or watching a YouTube video of some sort, all of those can be considered text or are considered text. And depending on the content in them, they can be considered complex as well. So I know that was kind of like some overview information about complex text. So let's kind of dive in now to kind of what complex text are a little bit more concretely if we can. And then we're going to talk about that formula that I really want you to walk away with tonight. So if you look at a complex text, there are some things that a complex text is going to contain. And I've created for you, and this is your freebie tonight, this is a rubric for you to be able to go through and look at a text and kind of use this as a checklist to understand what varying degree is of complexity is the text. So on here, you're going to see that we go from slightly complex to extremely complex. And there are some different areas in which we're kind of evaluate, and we're going to come back to these. But in a complex text, you're going to find a lot more implicit meanings. So it's very underlying, very ambiguous meanings. It's not concrete, it's not explicit at all. Very, very implicit meanings, very unconventional structures. You're going to have things like flashbacks, flash forwards, lots of points of view. Lots of figurative language, unfamiliar language, academic language, language that is very specific to a certain domain or aspect or subject area, vocabulary as well. Um, the text is going to assume that the reader has life experience in that domain. So it's not going to give a lot of help or support. It's going to assume that the reader is reading this for a specific reason, and therefore it's going to get right to the point. Um, and then also a complex text can have literal meaning that is intentionally at odds with the underlying meaning as well. So kind of like the purpose of the text is very hidden. So that's a lot to take in, right? Now, how do we figure that out? Like, what does this all really mean? So when you're looking at a text and trying to decide whether or not a text is complex, you kind of have three different areas in which you want to examine the text, right? Three different areas. You want to look at the qualitative data that the text gives you, and we're going to dive into these. You want to look at the quantitative data that the text gives you. And then you also want to analyze the reader and the task as well, okay? So let's dive into these one by one. Let's talk about the qualitative data. Now the qualitative data, when I think of qualitative, I think about things that are, it's not number based, all right? It's things that are actually in the text itself. It's about the content and the structure of the text. So this rubric is all about the qualitative data, all right? So you have things like purpose, text structure, uh, the language, and the knowledge base. So those are kind of the four main areas that you can analyze to understand whether or not a text is complex. So when you're thinking about purpose, it kind of goes one way or the other. Is the purpose of the text very clear, very explicit, clearly stated, or is the purpose of the text more ambiguous or implicit? All right. So there you've got one end of the spectrum to the other, and then it kind of varies in degree in between, right? So think about the purpose of your text. The other part of that is this text structure, and text structure kind of has a few points in it as well. The text structure can mean the text features. So when you think about the text features, if you're specifically obviously talking about nonfiction, obviously, the text features can kind of have a varying degree as well. They can be extremely crucial to understanding the text. So if they do not analyze these text features, they will not understand the text. Or on the other end of it, the text features are there and they kind of help the students understand the content. So you kind of have, again, two varying degrees. The text features are basically the content, and if you don't read them and you don't understand them and you don't analyze them, then you're not going to understand. Or on this end, they help students. They're not as crucial. Just if they weren't there, the students would still get the gist and understand the content, right? Then you have the graphics, and kind of the same way. The graphics of the text are completely necessary. They're sophisticated. The students need to analyze them in order to understand. And then on this end, the graphics are very simple. They're not necessary at all for students to understand the text. But then under text structure, you have kind of your gist, your main idea, your ideas, and then the relationship between those ideas. And how clear are those relationships for students? So again, on your varying degrees, again on your rubric that I'm going to give you, you have where the relationship of those ideas, there is a very deep relationship. And the text itself is organized in a very unique way. It's not a normal organizational system for a text. And then the relationship between the different ideas in the text is a very deep understanding. On the other side, where the text is not complex, then you have a relationship between ideas is concrete. Like you can clearly see the relationship between the ideas in the text. It's very concrete. And the organization of the text itself is very clear. It's very easy to read. It's a normal organization of the text. Okay. So all of that is just the overview of the text structure. Then still you've got language. So language is all about the um, like the vocabulary. So is the vocabulary unfamiliar? Are we using academic language? Is there figurative language? Things like think about like idioms or um, you can even think of it as conversational language, but in the way of um, what I'm trying to get out, like slang, right? So slang or idioms or figurative language or very domain-specific academic language. So look at the language part of the text. And then on the other end, it's just normal conversational. Students are not going to have trouble decoding the words or understanding the vocabulary. And then again, you've got your varying degrees inside. And then you also have your sentence structure in there. So we've got on one end, you've got like very, very complex sentence structure. And on the other end, you have very, very simple sentences. So that is a varying degree as well. And then your final piece is the demand, the knowledge demands. So on your highest level of complex text, you have a very high need for understanding the content knowledge. Like background knowledge is needed, or you will not understand this text. And then on the other end, it's kind of an everyday practical knowledge. Everyone's going to understand this kind of thing. Does your brain hurt yet? So this right here is all about the qualitative. It's about what is in that text, the knowledge, the vocabulary, there's organization and the structure of it. It's all about the text, right? So that's one area that you will kind of use to decide whether a text is complex. Okay, there's two more. The second area is the quantitative data. Quantitative, think about numbers. This is not something that a teacher can do or even wants to do on his or her own. This is something that you will put into a little thing called lexile.com and you will have them do it for you. Because quantitative is all about the sentence length, the number of words, in syllables, the word frequency. It's all number based, all right? So that's why there's such a thing as a Lexile level. Now, you do not ever want to use Lexile level as a way to assign text to students because that doesn't mean anything. You can have a very complex text with a very low Lexile level because it's just one of the three areas of what makes a text complex. For example, the book Lord of the Flies, which I know, raise your hand if you read that in high school, right? I would never give a second grader the book Lord of the Flies. But go to lexile.com. There is on that website a book tool search. So you can go and look for Lexile levels of books that are already published. The Lexile level of Lord of Flies is a 770. 770. That is a second grade level Lexile. Second and third grade. So what that means is it's not about the language being used. It's not about the content or the maturity of the content or what's in there. It's about numbers. How long are my sentences? How many times are words used over and over? How many syllables are in there? Are there lots of words? Like how many words? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, hundreds of thousands of words. That's clearly going to make a Lexile higher or lower. Like it's not about, you cannot use Lexile in of itself. I'll just get off my soapbox on that one. So that's only the second part. So then the third part is called reader and task. And this one is where it's all about teacher understanding and teacher knowledge. So reader and task. This is where you evaluate your reader. This is why I said at the very beginning, it's important to understand who's reading the text. Because you give a text to two different students, the text may be complex to one and not the other. So, and then also, what are you wanting them to do with the text? What is their task? What are you having them do? If you are having them do, a simple read and answer questions, then, the complex, wow, the text may not be complex enough for that task. But if you're wanting them to write, a 3-paragraph essay on, their opinion about multiple authors' viewpoints and then putting their own viewpoint in and understanding how they compare and contrast viewpoints and all that, and you give two texts for that, then, you just you right there in the task of itself, you up the complexity. So do you see what I'm saying there? You have to understand who you're giving it to and what are you asking them to do with it. So then all three of those in that little pie chart, qualitative, quantitative, and task and reader, kind of combined in one, that makes the three areas in which you go and analyze a text to base it whether or not it's complex. Now, raise your hand if you have time to do this with every text you give your students. I'm waiting on all the hands to be raised, right? We don't have time for that. So here's what I'm saying. If you understand that, if you can gather that information and understand basically that Lexile has really nothing, really, not much pull. Let's just say that. Lexile does not have much pull, but it's somewhat important. You have to know your readers. You have to understand the task at hand. And you do need to understand the qualitative part. I would say this right here is the most important part. Look at the language and vocabulary. Look at the purpose of the text, the ambiguity, the messages that are being given. If everything is is implied, if it's clear, then if you can tell that by the text, and your readers are going to get that, then that the text isn't going to be complex enough for everyone. So that would be where if I gave you all an assignment to do tonight, it would be to learn more about the qualitative side of text measurements. Okay, so when you're selecting a text, make sure you're always reading the text before you give it to your students. I don't know how many times I've worked with teachers when they will assign a text for an assignment, or they will go and read a picture book or part of a picture book or part of a novel, or whatever it may be, and they haven't read the text beforehand. I understand that that takes time, especially the longer of the text you're trying to give your students. But you are not doing your students any favors at all if you are just picking a text going, I think they'll like that topic, or, ooh, this was on ReadWorks this morning, or, essays.com, or whatever websites you use to find text. And you're like, the Lexile level is good. It's for my, it's on level for my second graders. And so they're going to like the topic. So here we go. Let's assign this one, and we're going to do some main idea and details work for this. No, that's not okay. Make sure you're reading the text. Is that text going to be complex enough? Is it going to challenge their thinking? You can do main idea and details work with a complex text and get more out of it than you can a text that the main idea is very clearly stated, right? What good are you doing for your students? Make sure you read the text first. Also, when you're finding a text, I want you to think about your targeted standards that you're trying to focus on and the curricular goals that you're wanting your students to meet. That text may not work for those goals. Certain texts are going to support certain standards in different ways. So again, back to the whole main idea thing, you may pull a text where the main idea is very explicitly stated. If you don't read it beforehand, then clearly you're not going to know that, and that text is not going to support that goal very well, because you want a text where the students are really going to have to, right, analyze the details and infer the main idea. But that text isn't proper, isn't the right text for that. So understand what you want to get out of the text and what your readers are going to have to do with their brains. Make sure the text allows that to happen in a complex way, and make sure you read the text beforehand to know that it's going to do that. Okay? And then think about this. Does the text provide opportunities for students to examine and analyze it thoroughly, make inferences, and uncover new insights? So that's kind of a big question that I try to keep in the forefront of my mind. I'm going to say that again. Does this text, and yes, I wrote this question down because I wholeheartedly believe we should be thinking about this. Does this text provide opportunities for students to examine and analyze it thoroughly, make inferences, and uncover new insights? So that right there is a big question that you can write on a Post-it, stick it on your computer, and keep in the forefront of your mind when you're trying to do this whole new, I'm analyzing text to make sure they're complex for my students, right? Okay, so I know I'm just kind of skimming the surface a little bit on this whole complex text thing. And believe me, I still do not consider myself an expert in being able to analyze complex text, because it's not a black and white thing still. It really is this trifecta of finding the text, understanding the goals, pairing it with the right reader and with the right task, and then seeing what we get out of it, right? And this really is a big key for a lot of teachers who feel like they're just not getting out of their reading instruction what they want, right? This could be a key for you. So when you find a text that you feel is going to do the job, and you know that it's complex, you've paired it with good standards, you've paired it with the right readers, how can you help your students, right? You don't want to just give them these complex texts and then let them struggle forever. It's all about that productive struggle, but how can we support the productivity side of that? So here are some things you can do very easily. I shouldn't say easily, but here are some things that you can do to support your readers. First, find an anchor text that you can then model prior to the activity. You want to make sure you are modeling with a similar complex text to show your students what type of thinking that they're going to need to do. Show the productive struggle, right? Don't make your reading look easy and then make theirs difficult. You want to show them, even if it's not difficult for you, clearly, I know you're an educated, you know, higher advanced reader. It's going to come easy to you, but don't make it look that way. Show them the productive struggle. Find an anchor text is what we call them, an anchor text, so a similar level of complexity that you can use to model the thinking that you're wanting your students to do. Make sure that is a part of your lesson, all right? Also, focus on your students' first read, okay? If we can support our students' first read of a text, if they can make sure that they're gathering an overall gist of that text in that first read, then their ability to go back and find bits and pieces that they don't understand is going to be more supported. So how do you do that? Set a purpose for reading. Make sure that you're accessing background knowledge, that you're asking an overall question and getting kind of some conversation going. Um, Ask a question that you want them to answer by the end of reading that text. You know, what are they getting out of this text? Why are we reading it? Set a purpose for reading. Also, teach them to reread or teach them the process of close reading. I have a great blog post all about the process of close reading and how to get that going in your classroom. So if you want that blog post link, let me know. But close reading is a fantastic strategy to help students cope with reading complex texts. And the close reading process isn't going to work if the text isn't complex. They're going to get bored. They're going to, why am I having to read this 3 times? I understand it. You're going to want to give them a text where they're going to understand why they need to read that text 2 or 3 times, because they're not going to understand it after a first read. They may get the gist, but they're not going to understand the entire text. They're going to need to go back. Um, Spotlight text evidence is a great thing that you can do for complex text. Really focus in on those really bits and pieces that make a text and what makes the text complex. Um, Also, support more writing. The more that students write when it comes to comprehension, the more they're going to be able to get out of a complex text. And I know that kind of sounds weird, but the research is there. The more students write about what they read, the more that it supports their comprehension. So whether you do a daily reading response or, a stop and jot activity every day, make sure your kids are writing about reading every single day. And then finally, read more. Let your kids read more. Whatever time you have in your classroom where kids are able to just read, whether it be something you assign them or not, increase it by 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. Let them read more. So all of those tips right there will help you help your students kind of cope with the struggles of being exposed and having to read those complex texts. So we skimmed a lot tonight about what a complex text is. Again, there is no black and white definition. I wish I could give you that, but there's not. There's so many varying degrees that it's just not a step 1, step 2, step 3 kind of process. I will be posting your freebie tonight. So you've got this rubric to help with the qualitative side. Remember, the quantitative side is all about that Lexile level. You can go to lexile.com. and insert a title or insert the text as well. You can copy and paste text into there, and use that as well. And then the third piece, remember, is all about the reader and the task, and that's all your knowledge. So it's really, I'm sorry to say it's muddied waters, but it's muddied waters. But the more you think through these concepts and these pieces, and the more you're aware of all of this, then the better it's going to be. So if you have any questions about complex text, let me know. I'm happy to help. Um, but like I said, I'm no expert. I'm only teaching you what I know to be true and what I've used and done in my classroom. But hopefully it's helpful. So if you have any questions, let me know. And until then, I'll see you next week for another episode in Adventures of Comprehension. Bye, everyone.